Okay, so today's topic, what I want to talk about is King Leopold II of Belgium. So many people, so many rumors, propaganda you'll hear saying that he was worse than Hitler. He is responsible, people say he's responsible for mass suicide in the Congo Freestate in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They'll say King Leopold massacred or created a genocide, or he's responsible for the genocide of millions of Congolese people. They say that they say that he is the sole reason for millions of Congolese, native Congolese people dying. That's what they say. So today we are going to debunk that, or we're going to at least look at the other side. So King Leopold II of Belgium, he ruled the Congo Free State, established the Congo Free State, and ruled it for 23 years from 1885 through 1901. King Leopold II should be cleared from all charges of slander and charges of being a war criminal and everything. His name should be cleared of all charges. Okay, so this is what they say. Now, remember what y'all said about him killing, being responsible for so many millions of people. Estimates of the death toll range from 1 million to 15 million. Since accurate records were not kept, historians Lewis and Stingers in 1968 stated that the population figures at the start of Leopold's control are only wild guesses, meaning they don't have any sources to conclude that there were actually millions of people. It's just wild guesses. And the attempts by E.D. Morel and others to determine the figure for the loss of population were but figments of imagination. So the numbers when they say millions of people die are figments of imagination, according to true historians. Adam Hochschild Adam Hochschild devotes a chapter of his book King Leopold's Ghost to the problem of estimating the death toll. He cites several recent lines of investigations by anthropologists Jan Vincina and others that examine local sources, police records, religious records, oral traditions, genealogies, personal diaries, and many others, which generally agree with the assessment of the 1919 Belgium Government Commission. Roughly half of roughly half of the population perished during the Free State period. Hochschild points out that since the first official census by the Belgian authorities in 1924 put the population at about 10 million. These various approaches suggest a rough estimate of a population decline by 10 million. Smallpox epidemics and sleeping sickness also devastated and disrupted the population. By 1896, African trypanosomiasis, or however you pronounce this word, had killed up to 5,000 Africans in the village of Lucky, Luckila on the Congo River. The mortality statistics were collected through the efforts of the British Council, Roger Casement, who found, for example, only 600 survivors of the disease in Lokilola in 1903. So, for one thing, the numbers of how many millions of native Congolese were killed or massacred by King Leopold is false because it was a wild guess. It's an estimate. There's no records or census to conclude that it was millions of people. B, there was an epidemic of smallpox and sleeping sickness that was killing thousands of people in the Congo. Not King Leopold, but epidemics. Smallpox and sleeping sickness is responsible for killing thousands of them alone. Now, Here is one thing that a lot of people don't know. But King Leopold II of Belgium, who was in control of the Congo Freestate, he never even set foot in the Congo. He was never there. I know that's hard to believe for a lot of you, but he was never there. I want you all to read what he had to say when he was accused of these atrocities. King Leopold denies charges against him. December the 11th, 1906, a couple years before he dies. So they asked him, then is it not true that atrocious conditions existed in the Congo region? Was asked. He replied, of course not. People should credit us with common sense, even if they will not allow that humanity exists outside their one country. It would be absurd for us to mistreat the blacks because no state prospers unless the population is happy and increasing. America knows perhaps better than any country how true this is. Many of the people maligning us are doing so from interest motives. It seems a new trade has arisen in the world that colon whatever that word is. There are those who make their living by forming associations to protest against anything under heaven. Recently, a certain American missionary made sensational Congo charges and bitterly attacked me. Some on wrote of his language and received a letter from him saying he had never been to the Congo. All his charges were based on hearsay. Is this is this manner many reports as the Congo circulated, while these who speak from first-hand evidence magnify particular incidents and generalities. Charges charges about the Congo cruelty spreading the false reports finally to believe they are not true. All right, what else down here? I do not deny that there have been causes of misjudgment on the part of the Congo officials. Most likely, cruelties, even crimes, have been committed. There have been a number of convictions before Congo tribunals for these offenses. I do deny that every effort, as far as possible, has not been made to stop the ill treatment of natives, no, not only by white people, but by natives themselves. So there was mistreatment going on by whites and the natives themselves, as you read. Now, Leopold goes on to say, "We have been what this is what they managed to accomplish in the Congo Free State. We have been fortunate in reducing smallpox in Central Africa by the introduction of vaccine, because the smallpox was killing thousands of Africans, so they helped them by bringing vaccines there. We have stopped the Congo slave trade and prohibited alcohol from entering the country. So King Leopold also stopped slavery. He stopped the slave trade there, and he prohibited alcohol from entering the country. But steamers on the rivers have built and are building railways and introduced the telegraph. Now we are sending out motor cars. So these are ways that they help the Congo Free State that you won't often hear people talk about. All this is only the beginning of our work. By the concessions we have given, especially concessions to Americans, we have reduced almost to nothing the territory of barbarism. Now we must fight the dreadful disease known as sleeping sickness. So they also have another epidemic killing thousands of people in Central Africa called sleeping sickness that he is helping them battle, which has depopulated not only the Congo but also Uganda. We hope with the help of Almighty God to succeed in stamping out this scourge in Africa and dealing with a race composed of cannibals for thousands of years. It is necessary to use methods which will best shake their idleness and make them realize the sanctity of the work or whatever it said. So he's saying that they're bringing modern technology to these people. These are hard people to deal with. They have been cannibals for thousands of years. It is asserted to you are financially interested in the Congo and make a huge fortune there yearly. Is this so? This is what they asked Leopold. Leopold replies, it is absolutely false. I am the ruler of the Congo, but the prosperity of the country no more affects me financially than the prosperity of America increases the means of President Roosevelt. I have not 1 cent invested in Congo Industries, and I have not received any salary as Congo executive in the past 22 years. I am in no shape or form have I bettered myself financially through my relationship with the Congo. On the contrary, I have spent large sums of my own in developing the country, sums amounting in the exaggerate to millions. I am poorer, not richer, because of the Congo. The betterment of the country and the improvement of the conditions of the natives are the only objects of my effort. So, for those who say King Leopold was getting rich off the Congo, he denies that. He says that is actually the opposite. He spends more money dumping into the Congo than what he's getting back. He says, I'm poor, not richer because of the Congo. He's bringing technology there. He's stopping the slave trade. He's stopping alcohol being shipped there. He's bringing railroads there. I know these are persons so constituted that they are unable to appreciate such a statement. They believe readily enough, however, false charges that I am rolling in with wealth at the expense of dying natives. They see me as a boa constrictor, squeezing the life out of the blacks in order to put gold in my purse. Why should I do such a thing? Of what use is money to me? I am not in the prime of my life. I have passed 60 years and 10 of my earthly journey. I cannot take money out of this world. Why should I pile up gold for the sake of wealth? I have sufficient for my wants, and I do not wish for more. I am not a businessman. I am a ruler, anxious only for the welfare of my subjects. It is more to me than money, and to a miser for me to know my work in the Congo has not been vainly spent. From wild African forests inhabited by cannibals, the Congo has developed wonderfully, its revenues increasing from nothing to 10 million annually. Okay, now this is where it's going to get good. For those who say King Leopold himself is responsible for all of the millions of people dying and the atrocities of the natives in the Congo Free State. That is not true. This is the force responsible for every time you see the pictures of little girls and boys and people with their hands and limbs cut off because they didn't get enough rubber. These are the people who's responsible for them. Force, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. Force publique. It was a gendarmerie and the military force in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo from 1885 through the period of the Belgian colonial rule. These people are now today known as the Congolese National Army. Now, pay attention, remember this, the Force Publique. These are the forces that were in charge of the whole operation in the Congo Free State. It was initially conceived in 1885 when King Leopold of the Belgians, who held the Congo Free State as his private property, ordered his secretary, of the Interior to create military and police forces for the state. Soon afterwards, in early 1886, Captain Leon Roger was sent to the Congo with orders to establish a force. A few months later, on the 17th of August, he was promoted to commandant of the Force Publique. If I'm pronouncing that right, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. A number of other Belgian officers and non commissioned officers were also dispatched to the territory as the nucleus of the officer corps. The officers of the Force Publique were entirely European. The officers, not the soldiers, the officers were entirely European. They comprised of a mixture of Belgian regular soldiers and mercenaries from other countries who were drawn by the prospect of wealth or simply attracted to the adventure of service in Africa. To command his force, King Leopold was able to rely on a mixture of volunteers, regular officers detached from the Belgian army, mercenaries, and former officers from the armies of other European nations, especially those of Scandinavia, Italy, and Switzerland. To these men, service in the Congo Freestate offered military experience, adventure as they saw it, and an opportunity to participate in a humanitarian endeavor, however you pronounce it. In 1886 and 1908, the officer corps consisted of 648 Belgians, 112 Italians, 53 Danes, 47 Swedes, 26 Norwegians, and smaller numbers recruited from other nations, such as the United Kingdom and the United States. So the officers of this force were completely European, made up of detached officers from the army, mercenaries, and volunteers. Now, serving under these European officers were the ethnically mixed African soldiery, who eventually became comparable to the Askaris fielded by other European colonial powers. Many were recruited and conscripted from warrior tribes. So the people serving under these officers were other Africans from warrior tribes. So anytime you hear warrior tribes, these are some really ruthless people who care nothing about life or death or torture. Um, so they recruited from warrior tribes. Others were mercenaries from Zanzibar and West Africa, particularly Nigerian Hausas. The role required of the Force Publique was that of both defending the Free State territory and the internal pacification. In the 1890s, Force Publique defeated the African Arab slavers, and we're going to talk about that later on in this video, in the course of the Congo Arab War, which resulted in tens and thousands of casualties. As time went on, Force Publique began to increasingly recruit and rely on Belgian officers and native Congolese soldiers, so that the white and the black foreign mercenaries had been mostly phased out by 1908. Now, let's talk about the atrocities. Under King Leopold II, the Force Publique was described as an exceptionally brutal army. One major purpose of the force was to enforce the rubber quotas and other forms of forced labor. Armed with modern weapons and a chicote, a bullwhip made of hippopotamus hide, soldiers of the Force Publique often took and mistreated hostages. Soldiers of the Force Publique often took and mistreated hostages. Now, remember what we said up here. The soldiers were native blacks, were native Hausas and native people from the Congo. So these are the people who were amputating the limbs and doing all the atrocities and torturing people. It was the soldiers. the people who they recruited from the native warrior tribes and the Hausas, and people from Zanzibar. So the native Africans were the ones who were mistreating the hostages, not the white Europeans. Reports from foreign missionaries and consular officials detail a number of instances where Congolese men and women were flogged or raped by soldiers of the Force Publique. So they were being flogged and raped by the soldiers. Remember, the soldiers are the native people that they recruited, not the white Europeans. They were being raped by the native people of the Force Publique, unrestrained by their officers and NCOs. So while they were doing this, their officers are the white Europeans. So their officers, the white Europeans, did not stop them. Apparently, they let them do what they want to. They did not stop them. So that doesn't make them wrong, but at the same time, they aren't the ones that do it. But that doesn't mean that they're not wrong for stopping it. These people do something, and and the officer just sort of stood by and watched. They burned villages they viewed as whatever the words say. There's evidence, including photographs, that the Force Publique soldiers cut off human hands either as trophies or to show that bullets had not been wasted, or by cutting off the limbs of children to punish parents viewed as not working hard enough in the rubber plantations. So these were the soldiers committing these atrocities, not King Leopold II, not the white European officers, but the soldiers. Now, what you can say is that King Leopold, um, he hired all of these people, and he should have paid more closer attention to who he hired. But when you're that high up in the command chain, it's you don't really know what's in the minds of a lot of these people. So remember earlier we talked about King Leopold's Force Publique, who they were in the Congo. While they were there, they also fought against the Arab slave traders coming in from the east, from Zanzibar and Sudan. So had the boogeyman, as y'all call him, King Leopold, have not been there, all of the Congo and who knows what other neighboring states would have been further subject to these very even more cruel Arab slave traders. And I'm pretty sure by now you all know how everywhere where Arabs take over, just look at it. Is slavery one runs rapid, all sorts of atrocities to this day. So pick who you think is more worse. And this was called the Congo Arab War that they fought there. It was fought between the forces of the Belgians, King Leopold II's Congo Freestate, and various Zanzibar Arab slave traders led by Tupu Tip. Now, a lot of you might know Tupu Tip. He was a very notorious black Arab slave trader from Zanzibar. He owned thousands and thousands of slaves and hundreds of plantations. He's responsible for more atrocities than Hitler and King Leopold and anybody else you could think of. This was an evil man. King Leopold was fighting against him. And luckily they whooped their ass down there in the Congo. So for this last one, a lot of people will talk about King Leopold wrote a letter to the missionaries talking about how you have to teach the native people their religion so that they will be good slaves and servants to me and blase, blase, blase. That is completely false. That letter is a completely fraud. King Leopold never wrote that. Let's listen to see what this gentleman here has to say about it, about how the letter is fraud. In the year 1970s, an anonymous typewritten text of 2 or 3 pages circulated in Zaire, the now Democratic Republic of Congo. sometimes represented as a speech of King Leopold II at the arrival of the first missionaries in the Congo in 1883. In 1984, in the Jesuit newspaper Zaire Afrique, the priest and historian um, Frankos Bontenik demonstrated by internal and external criticism that this document was a forgery. So even as back as 1984, they were saying that this document, historians were saying that this document is a forgery. Bontenik was under assumption that the text was relatively new and probably of Congolese origin, even if he could draw more or less close to the abundant critical literature in the early 18th century of Belgium. Great Britain and the United States had attacked Leopold II and his colonial project. This scientific development had no effect, and the text continued to circulate, crossing the borders of the Congo, in particular thanks to the internet network where it feeds the contemporary memories of the colony. Let us start here with the first attested appearance of this text in the Congolese context. Its initial success must be understood in the light of the history of the conflict which opposed the Zairean state to the Catholic Church from 1971. That year, Cardinal Mulala, and the same one whose initiative to Africanization of the Catholic Church had inspired President Mobutu in his quest for legitimacy. The famous policy of authenticity had entered into open conflict with the regime by opposing the introduction of youth cells of the Popular Revolution Movement JMPR in Catholic schools and mission and seminars. So, people, there you have it. King Leopold denies all charges. He never even set foot in the Congo. I showed you that it was actually the native Africans, the local native Africans, who were responsible for amputating all of the limbs and all of the mass rapes and all of the bloodshed. Um, it was the native Africans who did that. So what I just showed you, and the number of people who died was highly exaggerated. There's no way to know what number, and there was also epidemics rampaging through the land. Smallpox and sleeping sickness was killing thousands of people. King Leopold, he stopped the slave trade in the Congo. He stopped alcohol being shipped there. He created railroads and telegraphs, and he also stopped the Arab slavers from entering the Congo and further expanding their slave trade. And he never wrote a letter to the missionaries, trying to make the people be uh, more of better slaves. King Leopold, he says he never earned any mass wealth from putting this money into the Congo. He actually became more poor from it. He claims he was there to help the natives, and that he did increase the morality of the natives in Congo. The Democratic Republic of Congo now, it is better. It is better than it was before King Leopold had established the Congo Freestate. You can look at the statistics. Before he arrived there, they were still cannibals living barbaric lifestyles. And these are just the cold-hearted facts. This is how history played out, and that's that. Everybody have a good night.